What is up, you guys? So I wanted to put this video out on YouTube of a conversation that I had with Bart Kay. He's a pretty well-known carnivore advocate. He's currently in New Zealand, so he's got an awesome accent. He's got his own channel, which we will reference in the notes of this video. Everyone on social media was telling me that I should connect with him, so I reached out and we recorded a Zoom call and decided to just put it out so everyone can see the stuff that we're talking about. So we talk about all kinds of cool things. We talk about lipids, we talk about Bart's story, his pretty incredible transformation from an individual with pretty significant psychiatric issues, fibromyalgia, to someone who doesn't have any of those problems anymore after he transitioned to a carnivore diet. So it's a pretty incredible story. He also talks a little bit about his previous history in academics and what led him to leave that. We talk about lipids. He has a lot of experience dealing with those, previously teaching cardiovascular physiology to medical students. And then we get into some discussion of inflammation, cellular mechanisms of mitochondrial dysfunction, which are super interesting. And we talk about fiber, the non-need for vegetable fibers for short-chain fatty acids, and a healthy gut microbiome, healthy mucus lining of the gut. So it's all kind of from the perspective of two guys who are super excited about a carnivore diet, but I think it'll be really interesting and educational for you guys. So check it out. Let me know what you think, like and comment below. As I say in the video, I will let you guys decide what we will talk about in the future. I think I'm going to do more of these conversations with people. I'm probably going to be starting my own podcast soon. As you know, I've been on a lot of other cool podcasts recently, Ben Greenfield. I've got some other awesome ones coming up. So check those out. I'm going to probably be starting my own, but leave comments below if you guys have ideas for videos that you would like me to do, maybe with Bart or with other people. I've talked to Bart and he's totally on board with doing more of these sort of video chats together. We can talk about science, whatever you guys want to hear. So hopefully this is interesting to you guys. Check it out. Let me know what you think. I'm excited for you guys to see it. Let's go. All right, what's up, you guys? I am here with Bart Kay. Bart is in New Zealand. He is also very deeply involved in the carnivore community, and everyone has been telling me on Instagram and social media that we should connect. So we are doing that now. We've never met in person, but we're just kind of sitting down together to dialogue and share some ideas about our own experiences with the carnivore diet. And we thought this would be really cool. We should record it, and we will share it with all of you guys on YouTube, which you're probably watching now. So it's great to meet you, man.
Likewise. I've been looking forward to talking to you for a couple of days since we decided we were going to do it. It's really good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this should be fun. Two people who are deeply in the carnivore space. So we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but why don't you tell people a little bit about your background and how you discovered the carnivore diet, how you got into this whole thing, and what led you to this point?
Sure. So I guess my background professionally is that I'm a former senior lecturer in cardiovascular pathophysiology. Before that, I did a number of years teaching exercise physiology and working with elite athletes at the high end of the human performance spectrum. For example, I did some work with the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. I did some stuff with the NRL referees in the rugby league down here. And I've also worked with both the Australian and New Zealand Defence Forces in terms of their SAS, high-level SEALs type operations in terms of some of that sort of stuff. So that's kind of the background there. I was involved obviously in the academic side of things. Probably had a reasonable list of publications that I've sort of authored over 17 years or so. I ran into issues, I guess, in academia with them wanting to more and more as I progressed through academia. Throughout that sort of period of time, there were more and more people putting together these external sort of authority type structures. Like there was in the exercise physiology, there was a a group of people that said, okay, we want to be the authority in exercise physiology. We want to be the external accreditors. We want to be the certificators. And they sort of self-claim the authority and set themselves up to do that. And then they start interfering with people's academic freedom and telling academics what they should be teaching students and what the standards are based on what their position is. And of course, we've seen that and have seen that been going on in the nutrition sciences
right.
for years and years and years. So it was no shock to see it starting to happen. Basically, at the end of the day, there's $1 to be made there. There's control to be exerted, and so there's always going to be someone that jumps into that breach and causes that to happen. But the problem I ran into was with, I guess, other academics not wanting me to stand up in front of fresh-faced, fee-paying students and tell them the truth about physiology and pathophysiology. What they wanted was someone to stand up and parrot the lines they've been saying for the last 20 years, and those lines are the ones that are bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical companies. For example, LDL causes heart disease and you should take statins to sort that out. So, when I was dealing with pre-med students as a lecturer in cardiovascular pathophys, and when I was standing up and saying, no, that was kind of annoying, the powers that be. So while the law protects an academic such as myself and says that he or she can say whatever they want to, actually, whether that's popular or not, they have ways of making your life miserable. And they did. And so finally, after 17 years in academia, at the end of the academic year in 2016, I was living in the UK at the time. I said, actually, that's enough. I will not be renewing my contract. Thank you very much. I'm out of here. And I moved home to sunny, beautiful Nelson in New Zealand, where I now live modestly, because I don't any longer have the academic salary, and I'm building a YouTube empire, and I have a Patreon channel for those that want to support that.
Right, you have a YouTube channel and Patreon, so people can check that out. That probably, I guess we're both going to post this on our respective channels. So if people are watching it on one of our channels or the other, they should go check out the other person's channel. We both have YouTube channels, so go check out Bart's channel.
Exactly. And any of my people who are not subscribed to Paul's channel, it's well worth it, guys. There's an absolute treasure trove over there of information. And we'll probably get to some of that.
Hopefully we will.
But in terms of the academic, in terms of the dietary side of things, the carnivore side of things, I mean, obviously, as an exercise physiologist, one of the things I taught was exercise, nutrition, and of course what they were teaching was carbs and more carbs, load your carbs and make sure you have some more carbs on top of that.
Wow.
Load your saturated fat, of course, because that causes heart disease is what they would tell us. And, all that kind of stuff, which I actually never bought into. I thought this is not right. And so, looking more and more into that and having now got to the point where I've studied, very, very significantly, I guess, in nutrition as well, and, published a few articles myself in the area, including a book chapter, I guess. I'm now at a level where I can see exactly where the stuff is, how it's developed, how the wool's been pulled over people's eyes and what goes on there. My personal journey with it was that I'd been following a basically ketogenic lifestyle for 20 years, I think. And that kind of got me to sort of 80, maybe 85% optimal health. Prior to that 20 years, I was on a sort of mixed diet, a standard diet, if you like. It was never, dirty. It was, I'm a human being. I have had some junk food in my life, but it wasn't the thing. It was what you would call a clean mixed macro diet, I guess, pretty much. And my health was absolutely appalling, to be fair. I have pathological demand avoidance syndrome, which is a mild form of autism, for those that don't know that one. And also, throughout my life, I've had bipolar issues, I've had depressive issues, I've had anxiety issues. In later years, I had really quite severe fibromyalgia. I've had diverticulosis. I've had pancreatitis, believe it or not, and I never used to drink. So it was what the meds put down to viral. Yeah, you name it, any sort of digestive disorder that you could think of, I've probably had. Pretty much. I am clearly gluten intolerant, which is no longer an issue, of course, because I'm a carnivore.
Right.
So all that's kind of the picture health-wise. So it was appalling. It was really, really bad. The ketogenic thing, as I say, got me to sort of 85% over 20 years. And then around about the 2016 mark, when I sort of had the headspace and I was like, right, I'm pulling out of academia. I'm not doing that. That's going to stop dragging me down. I've got some energy to look at my health again and what am I going to do? So it was at that point that I came online and started doing the YouTube thing and found out who was saying what. So, of course, I came across Sean Baker, who, by the way, I'll be talking to in the next few weeks. So, look, hang out for that one, boys and girls.
Nice. Yeah, awesome.
I've been wanting to talk to Sean for ages. So there you go. That's going to be happening.
Are you going on his podcast?
Yeah. I'm going to go
awesome.
on the Human Outliers.
Great.
Yeah, so that's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. Excited as. Anyway, let's stick with today. And obviously I came across the Petersons as well, and I started going, okay, look, this makes sense to me on a conceptual level. So I then started looking at some of the science behind it, and the state of the science supporting the carnivorous diet is still very embryonic. That
Right.
There's a lot of work that needs doing. But it was enough for me to go, yep, okay, I'm going to try this and see if what they're talking about is right. 14 days, actually, on the carnivore diet. That last 15% of issues evaporated, really. So there you go. I'm just getting a message that my internet is unstable. So if I do disappear, we'll just, we can pick it back up. I guess we'll try.
It cut out for 1 second there. What were you saying about I heard something and then it cut out and I heard 14 days on the carnivore diet. Will you just repeat that?
Yes, absolutely. So after 14 days on the carnivore diet, that last 15% or so of the health issues that I was having basically just evaporated. And I literally couldn't believe it. It was like the magic pill, I guess, in terms of the last little bit of the fibro. I don't have any fibromyalgia issues to speak.
That is so cool.
Now at all. And literally it was at a level where there were some days I could not get out of bed. I was the plastic man. I could not move any of my joints. I was stiff as. The pain was unbelievable, and that's just sort of gone. The autism thing is what it is, and I'm wired a certain way, and that's not, that's my personality. I find that I feel much better adjusted to the world. People react to me much better. So it seems to me like I'm actually interacting with people better in general, except idiots that want to come online and tell me I'm wrong.
Nobody likes that.
Nobody likes that. So they get short words from me.
Talk to me about Lane Norton.
Oh my God. Oh, what a goon. There you go. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
That's kind of my journey.
What about the bipolar and the anxiety? See, this is so interesting to me, Bart, because...
Oh, look. Again, both things that have just evaporated. I mean, it's like a cloud has been lifted, to use, the old hackneyed phrase. I have an entirely different outlook on pretty much everything. While I was kind of in the trenches battling the bipolar and the anxiety, I mean, can you imagine someone on a sort of $80,000 salary as a senior academic having the gumption to go, you know what, this is killing me and I'm going to stop doing it. Right. And I'm going to start from zero, literally, and try and build an income through YouTube and Patreon and that kind of thing. And go and, live basically as cheaply as possible, basically off grid, if you like.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't have happened. It's just, I'd be entrapped in that thing, and it'd just become a downward spiral that, so I guess even there to sort of give you an idea of how that pans out.
In terms of anxiety, or in terms of psychiatric, or in terms of like your psychological reaction to that kind of a decision, is that what you're saying? That
exactly, yes.
To even have the mental fortitude to make that huge leap, there must have been something different about the way your brain was functioning.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so cool to hear. For people that don't know me, I'm a classically trained physician. I'm an MD. I'm in the last few months of my residency at the University of Washington in Seattle in psychiatry. I don't think of myself as a psychiatrist. I think of myself as a physician, and I'm interested in functional medicine and the way it all connects. But when I will tell you this, and you're probably aware of this, that in my clinical practice as a resident in psychiatry over the last 4 years, so in the US, medical school is 4 years, you get your MD, and then you do a residency, psychiatry residency is another 4 years. So I spent the last 4 years seeing patients with depression and anxiety and schizophrenia and bipolar and autism spectrum. And I will tell you that no one gets better like what you are describing, from what I've seen with medications. It is so hard to treat anxiety and depression with medications. And so it's so cool. And that was what originally drew me to the carnivore diet, was this idea that I was seeing this in chat rooms and on Sean's website, Meat Heals, and Sean's website, N=1 or N=many. The idea that people were improving from psychiatric conditions. You hear Amber O'Hearn's story by eliminating plants from their diet was simply paradigm shifting for me. It's so cool to hear that you had the same experience, because this really, I think this in the next 5 to 10 years is going to rock the foundations of Western medicine. The idea that plants are not the panacea, and that for some people, they may be triggering major issues, whether they're autoimmune, psychiatric, which if people have heard me speak, I would argue that many psychiatric issues are autoimmune.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so, I think this is such an interesting idea, and that's so awesome to hear that you had such an incredible personal improvement when you cut out the plants within 14 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, if people are listening to this and they're thinking about a carnivorous diet or they're not getting better, I mean, these improvements can happen pretty quickly. I think people don't even need to wrap their head around a 3-month or a year-long trial of a carnivorous diet. They could probably see a difference in a week or two, maybe, by just cutting out plants for a week or two, and they might get improvements in any autoimmune condition or a psychiatric condition. That is such a powerful tool, and it's such a game changer. It's such a paradigm shifting thing. That is a complete shift to the paradigm. I mean, when you did that, were you just like stunned? Like, what? I can't even believe this is happening.
Yes and no. I mean, because I'd done the research and I'd gone, this is what Sean was talking about. This is what the Petersons were saying. And then obviously others that you watch on YouTube as well. And I thought, well, there are so many people saying this. There's got to be something in it.
Yes.
You always doubt, of course I'm going to be an outlier. It's not going to work for me. So when it did, and so quickly, I was like, wow, why isn't this mainstream? Why isn't this being taught in our colleges and in our schools? And of course, we know the reason why. It's the green stuff that's involved in all of this. It's the fact that the pharmaceutical industries, we're talking also about big agricultural concerns who basically own the dietetics associations outright.
Yes.
And direct them as to what their position statement is going to be. And so science and people's health actually falls basically dead last on the hierarchy of needs, actually. So it's about lining the pockets of the fat cats, and it's nothing to do about your health or mine, Paul. And we all have to take responsibility for ourselves and be prepared to do our own N=1 naturalistic observation.
Yeah.
And what I think people find, obviously, in my case, like 2 weeks, some people maybe 3 weeks or a month. Some people in the first week will go, wow, something is happening here. This is incredible. I feel better. Even if they didn't necessarily feel like there was anything wrong in the first place, they suddenly start realizing that there are things that were wrong. Right. They just had taken as, well, that's just life. That's just normal. I mean, my grandmother, bless her, used to say, in this life we suffer pain, and over the road they suffer the same, son. And so people get used to it and think this is normal. This is how it's supposed to be. This is a test for us to no, this is not normal, people. You don't have to suffer this way.
That is exactly what I see being in Western medicine. Being a physician, there is this very subtle propaganda among other physicians that people will just get sick and we cannot do anything to reverse it. And in medical school, in my education, at least in the US, there was really this propaganda, this subtle propaganda, this undercurrent that people get sick because of genetics, and you can't fix genetics. And so what do you need? You need the magical pharmaceuticals from the gods. And so the paradigm that I was trained in, which has always been something that I have rebelled against, not often to my, not for the best outcomes for me, but, politically, but was this idea that like in the Western medicine, I don't believe that the people I work with are ill-intentioned or not intelligent. I think so many of the physicians I work with are great people and they're brilliant, but we've all, as Western physicians, have to admit that we have been a little bit brainwashed by the system to think there's a problem, this is how I treat it. We never ask, what is the root of the problem? We just don't ask that. It's not within our wheelhouse. It's not on our tool belt. You look down at your doctor tool belt when you get out of medical school and you've got medications and procedures. You don't have the ability to ask a question, what is causing this illness? Because that requires time and intellectual curiosity, and it actually probably challenges our egos, because then we're thinking, man, I just went to medical school. I'm supposed to be the smartest of the smart. And this person is coming to me as a patient. I have MD or DO or whatever after my name. And I'm a doctor and I don't know the answer to this question. Like, oh boy, but if I can give them a pill, it makes my ego feel okay. I can kind of hide behind the pill and be like, I know how to treat this, right? Yeah. Don't worry, I know how to treat this. But we're just not trained to be brave enough in Western medicine to ask the questions, what is causing this illness? And that, I think, is the greatest tragedy.
Yeah. I mean, I've even heard people refer to thinking about mechanisms behind disease processes and the etiology of disease processes as mechanistic speculation. It doesn't matter how these things occur. It doesn't matter why they happen. All that matters is we can give you this drug and it will sort it out for you. So shut up and take the drug and don't ask any questions. Exactly. The only problems being that I'll give you an example from my own experience, again, because that's a good place to start. By the end of 2016, I was on a cocktail of dangerous contraindicated poison prescribed to me by medically qualified people over there in the UK. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't making a dent in the situation. I wasn't better. It wasn't solving the problem. All it was doing was lining the pockets of the people that make these dangerous drugs. And I'll give you an outline of what they were, just for interest. I was on an SSRI. I was on pre-GAB. I had a PPI. What else?
People that don't know pre-GAB, you mean pregabalin?
Correct, yep.
Right. And in the US, we have gabapentin or pregabalin. Yep. So,
so I had
similar medications.
I had that. I had an SSRI. I had a PPI, which is the proton pump inhibitor situation going on there as well. I had an ACE inhibitor as well. What else? I think it was about 5 or 6 different things that I was taking, and all of them actually contraindicated dangerous poisons. Not one of them was actually sorting out the situation it was supposed to be, or indeed dealing with the root cause in the first place. So 12 months of taking that stuff without an effect, as opposed to 2 weeks sorting out the problem of the disease process in the first place, i.e. eating of plants. Okay, don't do that anymore. Whoops, situation is fixed.
It's a wild concept. I think that, people watching our channels probably are not foreign to this concept. But again, the idea plants can cause medical illness, that is a radical concept. And that is what we are trying to tell people. Yep. So, I want to get into the lipids because I've never done a lipid video on my channel, and you'd be a good person to dialogue with. And people are always asking me to do a lipid video. So let's dig into that a little bit, because you were doing cardiovascular science, and you've said originally that when you were teaching that you didn't feel like you could say LDL is causing heart disease, or it was that simple. Like, what was your experience of that? And what is your perspective on lipids? And maybe we can try and break this down for people and make it a little simpler. in terms of what is going on with cholesterol and cholesterol in the setting of carnivorous diets or ketogenic diets.
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, I guess the start point for me always in that discussion is, well, why do we have cholesterol in our bodies? So, like a really brief rundown on that. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, but basically cholesterol has many, many roles in the human body. So let's just go through a few of the most important ones. It makes up 50% by weight of every membrane of every cell in your body. Every one of those 3 or 4 trillion cells, 50% of that cell membrane is molecular cholesterol.
And you're talking about actually like a cholesterol steroid molecule. Yeah. Like the actual steroid backbone. We should probably clarify for people that when we say cholesterol, when people say cholesterol, they're often talking about lipoproteins, which are different than the actual cholesterol molecule. So if people are watching this and you get your cholesterol, quote unquote, checked by your doctor, you're going to get LDL, you're going to get HDL, you're going to get VLDL, you're going to get triglycerides, you're going to get total cholesterol. Yeah. But those are lipoproteins. Those are sort of membrane-bound entities that move throughout the body. And in those membrane-bound entities are molecules like cholesterol, which is actually a steroid backbone molecule, and triglycerides, which are composed, as the name would suggest, of 3 fatty acid molecules and a glycerol backbone. So people need to know that like cholesterol, quote unquote, panels incorporate lipoproteins, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, VLDL, and then when we're talking what Bart is talking about now is actually the cholesterol steroid backbone molecule, which is made in our own bodies by the liver. So so you're saying it's part of all the membranes.
All the membranes, as I say, and cholesterol, as Paul is quite rightly saying, is transported around the body in these different protein molecules, if you like, or lipoprotein molecules, which is outlined what they are. And that's, as he says, the thing that people are talking about when they're doing these panels. But people are thinking cholesterol is bad, we must lower cholesterol. In actual fact, a drug like a statin, what it does is directly inhibits the metabolic production of the molecule cholesterol.
Cholesterol, yes.
It doesn't actually change directly. It doesn't directly change the values of any of the lipoproteins whatsoever. It's about reducing the amount of cargo that they have to carry. So anyway, so 50% of all your cell membranes, cholesterol. Testosterone is made from cholesterol. Estrogen is made from cholesterol.
Yes.
Myelin for the myelin sheaths on all your neurons, that's cholesterol. Vitamin D3 is synthesized by a reaction with sunlight just underneath your skin with cholesterol. We could go on all day, but bile acids are made from cholesterol. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples of uses of cholesterol. It's an absolutely fundamental and necessary substance in your body. It is manufactured by your body according to the activity of an enzyme that encodes for its generation. Why is that gene there? Because it has survived 3.8 billion years of natural selection. It has a purpose. So does the cholesterol. Your genes know what they're doing a lot better than your MD, who has done probably 8 years of study to be an MD. Your genes have done 3.8 billion years of study. They know what they're doing, actually.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
They're there it's there for a reason. It's vital. It's very, very important. In actual fact, interfering with and lowering the level of cholesterol in your serum is not a good idea. That's actually contraindicated. That's associated with worse health outcomes. It's associated with increases in problems, not decreases.
What sort of problems have you observed? I was talking about this actually yesterday with Tristan. We talked about it a little bit on the Primal Edge podcast, that in some of the primary prevention studies where people are looking to lower cholesterol in people that have not had coronary events, we see an increase in violence. And probably, I would argue, there's good evidence that we're going to see more psychiatric problems. What have you seen or what are you aware of when people try and lower cholesterol too much?
Yeah, cognitive issues.
Maybe having to do with myelin sheaths on neurons.
Quite probably so, I would think. But also, you can have derangements in all sorts of different hormones and secondary hormone messengers and things, because they're all tied up with interactions with the cholesterol. Further to that, when you think about it, of all the thousands and thousands of different enzyme reactions in your body, probably 90% of those enzymes are activated by vitamin D3.
Yeah.
So if you have a problem with vitamin D3, which you will have if you reduce your cholesterol level pharmacologically, not a good thing. Further to that, you're going to also, because of a secondary effect of the statin medication, it actually basically is a direct mitochondrial poison,
Yes.
which actually acts in exactly the same way as does cyanide. The only difference is it just does it more slowly than cyanide does it.
So it inhibits one of the mitochondrial respiratory complexes in the electron transport chain in the membrane.
That's the one. Yeah, so it's coenzyme Q10 for those that want to know specifically which one it is. So there's that going on. Add to that the people that are undertaking such a statin intervention are probably also being told that they need to eat lots and lots of healthy whole grains and fruit, both of which are very, very high in deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen, if you like. Plants basically generate a lot of heavy hydrogen or deuterium on the carbon skeletons and all the sugars like fructose and indeed in the starches that are in there. So when you eat that stuff, you're actually putting a lot of deuterium into your system, and that directly interferes with the H0, H1 ATPase in the mitochondria as well, thus reducing the redox potential of your cells, thus increasing the free organic phosphate floating around in the cell, thus activating all your pro-inflammatory mediators.
Not a good thing.
Thus leading you to be a very angry young person or older person, as the case may be.
Right.
So I guess that's kind of one potential mechanism there, but there are many, many that we could talk all day about. I think for me, the take-home message is that absolutely you should not be attempting to mess around with what your body is setting in terms of the level of cholesterol that it is synthesizing. Most people also don't realize that 80% of the cholesterol in your body is synthesized in your body.
Right, rather than dietary cholesterol.
Correct. So your diet actually has very little meaningful effect on your cholesterol level whatsoever. And in fact, if you consume too much cholesterol in your diet, in other words, more than your body feels it needs at the time, it will simply shit it back out.
Yeah. Exactly.
So,
you don't absorb it. It's a pretty well-designed system.
Yeah, your body is a magnificent machine. It knows what it is doing. It does not need any help. Very much, thank you, from the pharmacological industry. So here's
this really interesting phenomenon. I'd love to get your take on this. What I have seen in myself, many carnivores, many people on ketogenic diets, is that the LDL number, so the low density lipoprotein number, goes pretty high when people do ketogenic diets. And I actually really like what you just said, that our bodies have had, millions of years of evolution, and prior to our hominid evolution, these systems have been in place. They've been conserved through evolution. So we're talking potentially billions of years of evolution of these enzymatic systems in the body by which we and our pre-hominid ancestors and even pre-humanoid people, or not even people, but pre-humanoid organisms are making the cholesterol molecule through enzymes like HMG-CoA reductase, which is what statins inhibit. And then as we talked about, when you inhibit HMG-CoA reductase, your body cannot make coenzyme Q10, which is downstream from cholesterol. And then you get a deficiency in that in the membrane. But one of the interesting phenomena that I see is not in everyone. So there's probably a genetic thing going on here, but in the majority of clients that I work with, the majority of patients I work with on ketogenic diets and carnivorous diets, the LDL number goes really high, and people get worried because they go to their doctor and the doctor says, you need to be on a statin. Yeah. And I think you and I both agree, people should not go on a statin for that reason. Yeah. But, any thoughts about that and whether we should be concerned about it? This is something I've talked a little bit about on my Instagram, but I've never done a formal YouTube. So this will hopefully be helpful for people. Okay. What are your thoughts about what happens there to the LDL number on a high fat diet like ketosis or a carnivore diet?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've sort of always said, and whether this is the mechanism or whether it's just one possible mechanism, is that one of the, like when I said a few minutes ago that 50% by weight of your cell membranes are cholesterol, that means that your cells need a lot of cholesterol delivered. And whenever you're eating a plant-based diet or a mixed macro diet, your body is actually not going to be best activated in repairing itself. It's actually going to be, fighting the good fight just to keep you standing, basically, because of all the pro-inflammatory and anti-nutrient issues that go on there. And I think that when someone switches to an indicated proper carnivorous diet, the body suddenly realizes, here's my window, here's my opportunity to do some good and to get this cholesterol A, synthesized, and B, delivered out to these cells so that it can do its good thing there. And I think that that's one of the reasons it's kind of a reactionary type response to the fact that we can now that the insult has ceased, we can now start the healing. And so you do get this spike in the LDL, and then these people will go to the doctor, as you say, and the doctor will say, you absolutely must be on a statin, otherwise you will die within 3 minutes.
Right.
Which frankly to me is I know the medical council mandates the physicians to act this way. They have their playbook. When you get a serum cholesterol level over this level, you prescribe a statin. That's what you do, and you tell the patient they must take it. And if you don't, you get struck off and you lose your job. So I understand why they're doing it, but nonetheless, it is malpractice because it is not informed by science. It is informed by people who have bastardized and manipulated science to their own ends. The money, the drug, it's a criminal act, basically, that's being perpetuated against the public by the powers that be, because in actual fact, there is only one population of people in which they have actually been able to show any benefit in terms of mortality or indeed hard cardiovascular endpoints in any kind of epidemiological study. And those are males over 65 who have already had the primary cardiovascular event.
Right.
So what I'm saying there for those that don't get that lingo is, well, you get males. Okay, so if you are a female, there is no evidence anywhere in the epidemiology that supports taking a statin for you. So men only. So that's the first one. Mm-hmm. Secondly, only men who are over 65. So if you are under 65, this does not apply to you either. So there is no indication for you there either. And you have to have already had a heart attack or stroke or, hard cardiovascular endpoint. Then there is some support for a statin reducing the likelihood of you having a secondary event within the next 5 years. Okay? And indeed, there's a reduction in your mortality there from cardiovascular events. Unfortunately, you then do the same analysis on that same males over 65 group who have already had a heart attack, and you chart their all-cause mortality, and you find out that the group taking the statins actually have a increased level of mortality because of the sequelae of the statin medication, like the loss of cognitive function, the walking out in front of a bus, the falling down and breaking your hip, the suicides, the sequelae of type 2 diabetes, which actually, is one of the side effects of statin medication as well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason that the statin has an effect on the secondary heart attack outcomes is not even because of its effect, its intended effect. The drug was designed to interfere with a specific enzyme. You've named it. It's HMG-CoA enzyme,
Reductase.
That's one. Thank you, Paul. Which actually is, if you look at the key pathway of the metabolic reactions, is actually fully 2 pages above molecular cholesterol, and everything else. Yes. And that tree gets knocked out completely, and that's why it's
amazing. If people look at the cholesterol synthesis pathway and they look at how high up in that pathway HMG-CoA reductase is, and they see all of the molecules that are inhibited in their production when you give a statin, they will think, "Wow, like don't those other molecules do something important in the human body?" And they do. Coenzyme Q10 does something important, among others. Like it's a big pathway.
Yep, they're there because genes encode for them. Why are those genes there? Because those genes have survived in natural selection. They're there for a purpose. Charlie Brown. Anyway, so statins do reduce the serum level of cholesterol. Absolutely, they work. They work very well. They do exactly what they're supposed to do. They do what they say on the tin. However, that's not the reason why the secondary heart attack events are reduced in that population. Okay, it's actually a confounder. All those molecules that get knocked out include some of the inflammatory pathways.
Mm-hmm.
We all know, any of us that know anything about it, that atherosclerosis, heart disease, cardiovascular problems of that kind, at their root cause is systemic chronic inflammation.
Yep.
So what we're saying is it's actually the anti-inflammatory effect of the statin that has the effect. It's nothing to do with the effect on the cholesterol, which is actually working against the anti-inflammatory effect,
Right.
as is evidenced by the increase in all-cause mortality for things other than heart attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So the end result is, sure, absolutely take the statin if you're a male over 65 who has already had a heart attack and doesn't want to have a second one, but be prepared that actually you won't live one day longer. In fact, you'll probably live 4.5 days less because you'll die sooner for another reason. Okay.
It's such an interesting paradigm, and the inflammatory piece often gets missed. And the idea, I think inflammation is a concept that people is not fully discussed on the internet. And I would agree with you completely. I think if we really break it down, most every chronic disease in our Westernized society is related to inflammation. And so I've talked about this on some podcasts too. Inflammation, as far as I understand it, I'd be curious to see how you would conceptualize inflammation or add to this, is like an immune activation. So what we're doing is we're crossing over from lipoprotein molecules to involvement of the immune system. And when we say someone has inflammation, what I think of is that someone has an immune system which is activated. It's overactivated, and it's activated for no good reason. And so what Bart is pointing out is that there are these molecules that get used as inflammatory signals that may also get knocked out by statins, and that perhaps the benefit of statins is related to the fact there's less inflammatory signaling. Now, the question always becomes, going back to what we talked about earlier, what is causing the inflammation in the first place? That's where we need to go focus our efforts. But it may be possible that if we can abrogate the inflammatory signaling, that may have some benefit. This is often called the pleiotropic effect of statins, or the anti-inflammatory effect of statins. People may have heard this word. It's something we throw about in medicine, pleiotropy. The idea that lowering LDL may not be what's really benefiting in terms of statin medications. It's quite a controversial topic. And so when people go on carnivore and ketogenic diets and the LDL goes through the roof, the question then becomes, does that matter? And is it going to accelerate atherosclerosis? My first thought is always, well, what is the inflammation? Is there any degree of inflammation underlying things? And we can check that in a variety of manners. When I'm looking to assay inflammation in someone, I might check something like hsCRP or serum interleukin 6, or look at other lipid parameters like lipid peroxides or DNA damage. When you're thinking about inflammation, how do you think about inflammation, and how would you measure that in someone if they wanted to know if they had inflammation?
Yeah, I mean, the one you mentioned there with the high sensitivity CRP is a good one, or hsCRP. That's while not infallible, that's a fairly good marker of systemic inflammation. Really, for me, the way that I've developed my model of understanding of inflammation is that inflammation and oxidative stress basically are partners in a dance. They swing off each other. Mm-hmm. One causes the other. So if you have, for example, an immune response to a non-native protein that might appear in your body for some reason, your body thinks, oh, that might be an invading pathogen. I better initiate the inflammatory pathway, and that will cause oxidative stress. Or indeed, if for some reason you suffer oxidative stress because of, for example, your diet, that in turn will actually activate the inflammatory pathway. And it does that by a mechanism of lowering the redox potential in your cells, thus increasing the free organic phosphate floating around. And it is actually phosphorylation of most of the pro-inflammatory mediators that activates them. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how those two things swing off each other. So one of the ways you might have your body react to an invading protein that's not a natural protein, not a native protein that the body generated, is we were talking about lipoproteins, for example. So the APO 100 protein, which is the one that basically distinguishes what an LDL is. An LDL transporter package, if you like, is actually determined by the fact that it has an ApoB100 protein. That protein is synthesized by your body. It's a normal, natural, native protein. Your body's not going to react to it or be concerned by it in any way, shape, or form, in any concentration, actually, pretty much. Mm-hmm. What happens, however, is if you have systemic damage to the vascular epithelial cells, they are going to want more cholesterol to repair that damage. So they are going to grab onto and bind onto those cholesterol transporters. And it's almost like a Velcro, like a hook, and it's sort of, those things will molecularly bind on. And so that ApoB100 lipoprotein, a low density lipoprotein,
right,
will then be bound to that cell, and that cell will be delivering the cholesterol to that cell. And that ApoB will be released when it's kind of done its thing and the inflammation is resolved. The problem with our modern Western society is the way we live is that the inflammation doesn't get a chance to resolve because we're doing all the wrong things. So that ApoB is not released. It's still bound there on that cell membrane. And so basically it's being exposed to oxygen and to circulating glucose and all sorts of things like that. So you get advanced end glycation product issues, you get oxidative issues. Basically what you get is a chemical derangement of that ApoB100 protein. Mm-hmm. So it's no longer the one that your body synthesized. It's recognized as potentially an invading pathogen.
Exactly.
That's what activates the macrophages, the foam cells. That's what causes atherosclerosis to begin. So that's one example. The other example, which is a good one from my good friend Dr. Jack Cruz, for example, and that's one of the things I actually offer in my consultancy, not to have a dig at Jack because Jack's great, but I love Jack, but one of the things I offer as a consultancy is I offer people who are really interested in what Jack has to say, please do go and listen to Jack and then come to my channel and ask me what the hell he said. Translated into English for you. So that's kind of that one. But basically, here's the take on it. It's the deuterium thing I spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
Basically, the H0, H1 ATPase is pretty much the throttle, if you like, on the motor of the energy generation in your body.
In the mitochondria.
In the mitochondria, yes. Mm-hmm. Anything that interferes with that will slow down the rate at which that motor is running. That will reduce the redox potential in the cell, and that will cause the phosphate problem, which will lead to an inflammatory situation.
Right.
As we said, anything that contains either fruit sugars that are not fruit sugars, or indeed starches of those sugars. So pretty much anything starchy or sugary, full of deuterium.
Yeah, the deuterium thing is, the deuterium hypothesis is quite interesting. If people are interested in that, they can look for that on YouTube. And Jack has talked about that. And there's another gentleman, what's his name? Laszlo Boris.
Yeah.
He has some videos on deuterium, but it's some interesting hypotheses about a heavier form of hydrogen, which is deuterium, which can get incorporated into our cells and then change the way the molecular motors are working in the mitochondria, and that can affect our metabolism. One of the things that, and I really appreciate what you were saying about the lipids and how the cholesterol molecules actually, the LDL molecules actually may be contributing to atherosclerosis. I'm not sure everyone is aware of this, so I'll just try and break it down for people again. So I think that the prevailing hypothesis, even within mainstream Western medicine right now, is that and I think we've seen this in multiple experiments in the past, that oxidized LDL, which has an oxidized ApoB100 particle or an ApoB100 protein on it, is really an atherogenic particle. But LDL, native LDL, that is not oxidized doesn't seem to really provoke atherosclerosis. And I think this gets back to what you were saying, that all LDL is not created equally. And this is why we need more sophisticated panels that look at LDL molecules and look at how many of them are oxidized and what the ratios are in the oxidation of LDL versus total cholesterol or oxidized LDL to HDL, because what is probably happening, and this is not an alternative hypothesis, this is accepted by most lipidologists now, I believe, is that the oxidation of the LDL, like you're saying, the oxidation of that protein on the LDL makes that ApoB100 molecule look very strange. And then when that ApoB, that oxidized ApoB100 containing LDL molecule is in the subendothelium, it gets gobbled up by a macrophage. It activates toll-like receptors on the macrophages. These are reacting to what are called pathogen-associated molecular patterns or damage-associated molecular patterns. And the macrophage goes over and says, hey, you're an invader, because a macrophage is an immune cell. And again, here's the immune activation that we were talking about. A macrophage is an immune cell, and the immune cell comes over and ingests the LDL particle. And this is what we know happens in atherosclerosis. In the process of plaque formation, you get a fatty streak that is a precursor atherosclerotic lesion. And a fatty streak is composed of subendothelial. The endothelium is the layer of the blood vessel which is the closest to the blood. So between the vessel wall and, well, in the space that forms up a blood vessel or an artery, there's a vessel wall. And if you cut that crosswise, you would see the endothelium closest to the blood, and then directly below that, you would see the subendothelial space in the intima. And in the intimal space or the subintimal space, you get these macrophage cells running around. And when they are ingesting LDL, and that is likely LDL that is oxidized, and you were tying this all together, the oxidative stress, the oxidative state of the LDL, when they are eating oxidized LDL, they become foam cells. And the foam cells make up a fatty streak, and that is the precursor lesion to atherosclerosis. So if we could go into your body or anyone's body and say, hey, do you have fatty streaks? If we could look in the subendothelial space for foam cells, we would see how much this process is happening. But native LDL, non-oxidized LDL, it probably doesn't do the same thing. Non-oxidized LDL doesn't get picked up by macrophages. There is this oxidative change. The LDL gets oxidized. So we're kind of back to this oxidative stress that you were talking about. And that could be connected with a lot of things. I've talked about this on podcasts before. I just want to clarify for people because we're getting kind of technical here. So when we're talking about oxidation, we're talking general chemistry terms. Oxidation is simply loss of electrons. Reduction is gain of electrons. So what we're talking about in terms of oxidative stress is when we say oxidative stress, we are meaning that we are ingesting molecules that tend to strip electrons from other molecules, or molecules that have an extra electron that they can donate to other molecules. So we're just talking about molecules with like rogue electrons. Those are free radicals. Those are oxidized molecules. That's what we don't want. And people talk about this in the setting of like oxidized omega-6. Omega-3 can become oxidized. So if we're talking about an omega-6, for instance, if people have listened to Tucker Goodrich, oxidized omega-6 is an omega-6 fatty acid that's lost an electron. Loss of electrons is oxidation. When I was in college, they used to say, Leo the lion says grr. So LEO, loss of electrons, oxidation, gain of electrons, reduction. So Leo and grr. Anyway, so if you lose an electron, you become oxidized. So when these fragile molecules are oxidized, they lose an electron, they end up with an unpaired electron, and that can create oxidative stress. So if that molecule, if that oxidized omega-6 ends up in an LDL particle, then the concern or the hypothesis, and correct me if I'm wrong here, would be that oxidized omega-6 that could then create an electron reaction or a lipid peroxidation reaction and affect the ApoB100 molecule on the LDL surface, leading to oxidized LDL. Is that how you think of it?
Yeah, that's one of the ways that the ApoB can be deranged. And indeed, the body can recognize the peroxide issue, or the oxidized lipid, I should say, directly as well, and can actually respond to that directly.
Yeah.
So, both of those things are pro-inflammatory. Just purely out of interest, I think it was November or December 2018, I published a paper along with co-author in the journal Nutrition. Not the Journal of Nutrition, the journal just simply called Nutrition, so people can find it. Yeah. It's basically what we did is we found very serious, very dangerous lipid oxidation products in commercially available omega-3 supplements, for example.
Oh, wow. What was the title of the article?
It was called Aldehydes Identified in Commercially Available Omega-3 Supplements, a 1H-NMR spectroscopy, something like that, anyway, and it's in the journal Nutrition. I can probably just about send you the link that you can probably link up there.
Yeah, I can put it in the YouTube. Yeah, we can. Yeah, I'm just seeing if I can find it right now.
myself and my lovely co-author, who happens to be my lovely partner as well, but that's beside the point, did the study a few years ago and finally managed to get it published around about November, December 2018. So that might be of interest to people as well.
Yeah, I found it. And if people are listening, I will tell them, why don't you tell us, what did you guys find in the study? And then I will tell people the PubMed ID number.
Cool. Okay, so what we did is we took 12 different samples of commercially available omega-3 supplements. Some of them were fish, some of them were krill, and some of them were algae-based. From memory, 8 out of 12 of them were tainted with aldehydes, which are a lipid oxidation product. Aldehydes are very, very dangerous to your lipid rafts, to your cell membranes. They're also mutagens in terms of your DNA. In other words, potential cancer-causing agents. They interfere with cellular function on all sorts of different enzymatic levels and things. Basically, they are not good. You don't want aldehydes in your system at all. So you're taking something that you believe is healthy for you, and in fact, it may well be poison.
There's sort of like you could essentially say an aldehyde is like almost a type of free radical, right? I mean, it's a complex organic chemistry term. It's actually what an aldehyde is, but an aldehyde, these are leading to free radicals. What you're seeing in these commercially available omega-3 fatty acids, which are supposed to be healthy, are these oxidized omega-3 fats.
Yep.
That's scary as shit.
Yes, that should scare people. So what I always say to people is get your omega-3 from your food.
Yes. And if anyone watching this will know that my favorite source of food-based omega-3 is salmon roe. What's yours? What do you like for omega-3 in terms of food sources?
I do enjoy a bit of roe from time to time, but not having the academic salary anymore, not so much these days. I tend to get, down here in New Zealand, we are so lucky with our seafood. We are kind of away from most of the nonsense. We don't have the mercury issues that a lot of seafoods will have. I just make sure that I have seafood once a week if I can at least, and I make sure it's wild caught New Zealand stuff and not farmed, basically. Yeah,
people do not want to get farmed salmon.
No, sir.
No.
Yeah.
Have you done your omega-3 index? It's an interesting tool for people to think about checking their omega-3 index.
I actually haven't done by way of doing a panel on it. The only way I kind of get a gauge on that is by looking at my 3-to-6 ratio in my diet from time to time. Obviously, what people need to do is aim for as close to 1-to-1 as they can in terms of omega-6 to omega-3. And I've found personally that the easiest, simplest, most practical way of doing that is to avoid omega-6 rather than seek out omega-3, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Yeah. So avoid everything that is high in omega-6 pretty much.
Which would be like nuts and seeds, plant foods. We need some omega-6. I mean, we need the omega-6. We need linoleic acid, which is converted to gamma-linolenic acid, and then it's converted to arachidonic acid. We need omega-6. Omega-6 is a essential fatty acid as well. And the difference between omega-3 and omega-6 has to do with where the double bond is in relation to the end of the chain. So an omega-3 fatty acid has the first double bond, 3 positions, 3 carbons from the end of the chain, and omega-6 has 6 positions. But people always talk about omega-3, probably because in most of our westernized diets, we don't get enough omega-3, and we're getting tons of omega-6. But yes, I think this omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is important. And generally with my patients and clients, I aim for an omega-3 index of 8 or 9. I've seen them as high as 13, but I really like the salmon roe or just fresh wild fish. And I agree with you completely. I couldn't agree with you more, Bart. I'm glad that we talked about that. I think that I dissuade my clients from using fish oils for this reason. It's just, they're too volatile. There's too many aldehydes.
Yeah. It's Russian roulette, basically.
Yes, it is. For people that want to look this study up that Bart did, the PubMed ID number is 305-29885. I will link to it in the bottom of this YouTube video. But that's a really cool study. Now, I want to talk about, I know we want to talk about fiber, but before we do that, can you tell me a little bit more, because I've heard you talk about this, and this is something that I want to learn more about myself. Can you, in like basic terms, connect the redox potential to the phosphate? Because, you know, when we are talking about redox potential, we're talking about the inside of a mitochondria, which is the cellular powerhouse. And in the mitochondrial membrane, there are all these proteins and complexes, one of them, which is coenzyme Q10, which we talked about earlier. There are other compounds in the mitochondrial membrane through which our bodies pass electrons to generate an electrochemical gradient of hydrogen ions. And then the hydrogen ions get concentrated inside the mitochondria. They pass through an ATP channel, which is what we were talking about with regard to deuterium. And as the hydrogen ions pass through that deuterium channel, we make ATP. We make the cellular energy. So help listeners understand what you mean when you say there are derangements in redox potential changing the phosphate status of a cell.
Okay, so yeah, absolutely. What basically the energy that is captured, if you like, by the hydrogen ions passing through that channel and spinning that wheel, that motor, the H0, H1 ATPase, that kinetic energy is actually encapsulated chemically and used to form the cellular energy currency, which is a molecule called ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, basically. And how it does that is it takes an adenosine diphosphate and a free phosphate and basically jams them together. Yep. So we've got ADP plus free organic phosphate. That gets added together to make ATP. That's a high energy bond that stores energy. That ATP then goes around the cell and does what it needs to do. So if you need some energy for another cellular process, the ATP is cleaved, releasing all that energy, and that energy is then used for that process. Yeah. Then releases the free phosphate back into the solution, and you've got an ADP molecule. Okay. Right. So when you have a situation where the system that's supposed to take that phosphate and join it to the ADP, thus removing it from the solution, in effect. So when you take a phosphate and you join it to an ADP, it's no longer in the solution. It's now an ATP. Right. And so the concentration of just the phosphate by itself goes down. Right. If you interfere with that system, that motor that runs that uses oxygen to produce ATP, what means is that there's less ability to generate ATP, so there's more phosphate floating around in the cell. Those phosphates, one of the things they can do is join on to another thing, in this case, an inflammatory pro-mediator, or a pro-inflammatory mediator, I should say, that activates that pro-inflammatory mediator. It's a message to that pro-inflammatory molecule that says, we're in trouble. The oxygen system is not working optimally. Right. We need to protect ourselves from invading pathogens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be on high alert. We need to be activated. We need to start an immune cascade. And it's that lowering of the redox potential, the reduction oxidation potential that causes that event directly to occur by basically phosphate bonding to those mediators. So that's
this is sort of what we mean when this is what when people hear mitochondrial dysfunction or problems with the mitochondria. This is essentially what we're talking about. This is essentially mitochondrial dysfunction, a problem with the electron transport chain in the inner mitochondrial membrane, leading to a redox potential. And when we say redox potential, we're referring to the amount of the ability of the mitochondria to pass the hydrogen ion through the motor and join the ADP to phosphate. So when we have mitochondrial dysfunction, we are not joining that ADP to the phosphate. There's extra phosphate around. That phosphate can diffuse into the cellular matrix outside of the mitochondria and activate pro-inflammatory mediators through phosphorylation. Is that right?
Yep.
So this is interesting because, this process of phosphorylation, the addition of phosphate groups to molecules is often how things are turned on and off. There are enzymes in the human body called kinases, which move phosphate molecules on and off proteins and turn them on and off. So this is interesting that when we affect the mitochondria, when the mitochondrial system is not working, this connects oxidative stress, which would be things like oxidatively, lipid peroxides, molecules that are missing electrons, to mitochondrial dysfunction. You're not doing the electron transport chain very well. You're not passing the hydrogen ions through the channel. And then you're having extra phosphate in the cell, leading to phosphorylation of inflammatory proteins. And then what you're getting is sort of a microscopic thing being translated into a macroscopic thing, because you're at a macro quantum level when you're moving electrons. And then you're getting activation of the immune system, which are actual cells. And then you're getting an inflammatory response. Is this pretty much what you were talking about earlier when you were connecting oxidation with inflammation?
Absolutely, exactly what I was referring to, Paul, and that's a really good explanation. So thank you for helping me to think about how to sort of communicate that in an accessible way. Absolutely, exactly what I mean, yeah. And
this is what's so interesting for people listening, that what we're seeing in Western medicine is and these go hand in hand, as Bart is explaining, that oxidative stress and inflammation are intimately connected, and they're almost the same thing. And that we have to be aware of places in our life where we may be ingesting things that can be oxidative stresses, excess omega-6, oxidized omega-3 like fish oils, or other things which can cause oxidative stress and trigger the immune system via oxidative stress. I think there are other ways we can trigger the immune system as well. I think that one of my hypotheses is that plants can trigger the immune system directly by offering lectins and sort of these foreign molecules that are not seen. But this is interesting to think about how we could trigger the immune system by eating things like oxidized fish oil or oxidized seed oil. So, and that kind of ties back. Yes, oxalates could trigger the immune system. Yeah. So what we're dealing with is, we don't want inflammation. We don't want to trigger the immune system. And it's important for us to understand what could be triggering it. Many of the things I think that are triggering it are these plant molecules, whether they're oxalates, plant pesticides, or lectins, which are carbohydrate binding proteins in plants, which could be perceived as toxic. I posted on my Instagram a really interesting thing that I heard Paul Mason talking to Gary Kerwin about recently, which is the transiting of lectin molecules through the vagus nerve to the brain of rats and interfering with dopamine signaling, potential mechanism in some people for connections with Parkinson's disease. But it's just this growing concern that like lectins from plants could pass through the vagus nerve. So I think that let's talk a little bit about fiber, and then we'll wrap it up for people. We should definitely do more of these. I think people would benefit. But yeah. So fiber is near and dear to my heart. It's nowhere near my guts, but I don't ingest any fiber. If people are familiar with me, they'll know that I debated Layne Norton, and that whole thing got started because I was arguing with Layne Norton about the essentiality, the non-need for fiber in the human diet, the potential harms of fiber in the human diet. But you were saying that you were interested in this idea around the need or the absence of need for butyrate or fiber for the colonic epithelial cells, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you want to go with that? What do you want to talk about with regard to fiber?
Well, it feathers into my upcoming ongoing discussions with Dr. Garth Davis, which people should tune in because they're going to be great.
I think this is an awesome series. People should check this out. So Bart is, in a friendly way, having intellectual discourse with a vegan doctor. So it's sort of showing people both sides, right?
Exactly. And what we wanted to do was to, Garth and I have talked about this at length, offline, privately, before we get into it in the public domain. We're not going to agree. We know that there are a lot of things that as a vegan doctor that he's going to believe that I'm not, and vice versa. But what we wanted to do was offer an alternative to the puerile nonsense, basically, that is floating around on the internet with the us versus them mentality, the vegans versus the carnivores mentality, some of the charlatans and ridiculous individuals that are running around saying all sorts of crazy things and stuff. And to be honest, I've been involved in it myself. I've called people short letter words and things, and some of them really deserved it too, because respect isn't actually that hard, to be fair.
Yeah.
But anywho, I've kind of decided, right, now that I've got to sort of level with my channel, I've got sort of 5,500 subscribers, and I want to sort of push through to beyond, obviously, and to get the message out there to more people and be more accessible. So I need to kind of conduct myself a bit differently from here on in. So that's kind of where we're going with it. And I said to Garth, look, here's an opportunity for two highly intelligent, highly trained, scientifically minded individuals to have a series of discussions about all sorts of crazy stuff like oxalates, TMAO, U5GC, I said oxalates, whatever else, and indeed fiber, the need for fiber in the diet, which of course is one of the go-tos that the vegans will say, oh, well, you must have your fiber because if you don't, you won't be producing short-chain fatty acids and the butyrate, and then your enterocytes will suffer and basically, you must have your fiber. So obviously, I sort of said to him, well, look, I'll talk to Paul because this is something he knows a lot about.
Oh, yeah.
And once I've spoken to you, i.e. now, I can get back to him and say, right, well, here's the take from Dr. Paul Saladino.
Yeah. So basically the idea with fiber is that this is a really interesting discussion. So there was, the fiber thing sort of started in the 1960s or 1970s when a physician named Burkitt went to Africa. And Burkitt was really interested in diverticulosis and the idea that in the westernized world, diverticulosis was rampant. And diverticulosis remains rampant. Diverticulosis is the outpouching of the submucosal layer of the colon through the muscularis mucosal layers, forming these blind pouches in the colon, sort of these small pouches.
Been there, had it.
What's that? Yeah,
I had it.
Yeah. And these pouches are often asymptomatic, but they can bleed. So they can bleed, they can cause lower GI bleeding, which can be life-threatening. And perhaps the most concerning complication of diverticulosis is diverticulitis, which is one of those pouches becomes occluded. And of course, the intestines are full of trillions of bacteria. So what do you get? You get essentially appendicitis in a diverticulum, which we call diverticulitis, which is the inflammation, the infection of a occluded blind-ended pouch called diverticulitis. Now,
one of the most painful experiences of my life, that was.
You've had diverticulitis, yeah. It can rupture in the gut, and then you get sepsis. Anyway, this is a horrible thing.
Not well at all.
Burkitt was very interested in what caused diverticulosis. And he went to Africa, and he saw these indigenous people eating tons of fiber and having huge poops. They were pooping multiple times a day, and they were having huge poops. And he thought, this is it. It is the fact that we are not eating enough fiber in the westernized world, and that is why we are getting diverticulosis. The problem is that when we have actually done the studies, this is not what we see, and we've actually seen the reverse. So I know we will get to in a moment the connections between the non-need for fiber and short-chain fatty acids, but in terms of fiber and diverticulosis, there are multiple studies that show that there is no benefit to fiber for reducing diverticulosis. And in fact, there have been some studies which show that as people eat more fiber, people develop more diverticulosis. And these are association studies. We can't claim complete causation, but I talked about this study in the debate with Lane as well. The study, I will quote people, but they did colonoscopy on people and they looked at the amount of fiber people were eating by quartile. And what they saw was that as people ate more fiber, they tended to have more diverticulosis. The name of the study is A High Fiber Diet Does Not Protect Against Asymptomatic Diverticulosis. And in fact, what they found was that people had more diverticulosis. And they said compared to individuals with less than 7 bowel movements per week, individuals with greater than 15 bowel movements per week had a 70% greater risk for diverticulosis. So I don't think this definitely says that fiber is causing diverticulosis, but it's these type of studies that raise into question strongly the idea that fiber has any protective value for diverticulosis. And then, there's another study, constipation and low fiber diets are not associated with diverticulosis. So when we give fiber, there is no benefit. And there have been other studies, which I will mention for people now, that when we reduce dietary fiber or completely eliminate it, we can often eliminate constipation and associated symptoms. This is one of the most striking studies. It's called Stopping or Reducing Dietary Fiber Intake Reduces Constipation and its Associated Symptoms. And that's from the World Journal of Gastroenterology. What they found in here was that idiopathic constipation and its associated symptoms can be effectively eliminated when you eliminate fiber. So the no fiber group had 0% bloating and 0% straining with stools and 0% constipation. What they found was that Fiber removal from the diet actually improved constipation completely, which flies in the face of all of our ideas, right? So medically, what are we told? You need more fiber so you don't get constipated, and you need more fiber so you don't get diverticulosis. Well, both of those are completely wrong. We don't need fiber to poop, as you and I will probably both attest to on carnivorous diets. It's lovely to poop on a carnivore diet. And in fact, fiber may be associated with worsening of diverticulosis, and fiber is apparently in many people worsening constipation, probably by creating overgrowth of the wrong type of bacteria, which can produce methane, which can be a paralytic to the gut enteric nervous system. So if we can go down and down the rabbit hole on fiber, but basically there is no evidence of benefit for fiber in colorectal adenoma prevention, colorectal adenoma recurrence. There is no benefit to a high fiber supplement or a high fiber diet in any of those things. So it is just crazy that we recommend fiber for all kinds of things, whether it's, you need fiber to prevent cancer or you need fiber for constipation. None of it works. So there's no benefit to any of those. So the next thing people say is, don't you need fiber for short chain fatty acids? And the answer is no. And when you look at this, what's so interesting is that what we are really asking is the question of, does fiber get metabolized into butyrate? Yes, it does. Fiber does become butyrate, butyric acid. Does butyric acid serve as a fuel for colonic epithelial cells? Yes, it does. Is butyric acid the only fuel for colonic epithelial cells? Absolutely not. Butyric acid is a short-chain fatty acid, is only one of many short-chain fatty acids. There are other studies that have been done in people where they do these like mini carnivore diets. They don't do it well, but they remove all the fiber from people's diets. And what they see is that they still make short-chain fatty acids. They just make different short-chain fatty acids. There are plenty of organisms in our guts that can metabolize fat and protein into short-chain fatty acids. So instead of making butyrate, we make propionate and we make isobutyrate. So those can serve as short-chain fatty acids. And then also, as you know, if you're not eating fiber and you're on a ketogenic diet, the circulation of the ketones in our body, in the blood system, those can act as fuel for the colonic epithelial cells simply through the blood system, because every colon cell can get nutrients from the gut, or from the blood system, because every cell in the body needs a blood supply. So if there is beta hydroxybutyrate in our blood, just like every other cell in our body, we can use that to be converted to acetyl-CoA to make energy as fuel. Just like glucose would be fuel for these cells, we can use beta hydroxybutyrate. Beta hydroxybutyrate can also be converted to butyric acid directly. So the idea that fiber has a monopoly on short-chain fatty acids is false. You can make plenty of short-chain fatty acids on carnivorous diets, and that's what we see, is that it just shifts to different short-chain fatty acids. And then people will say, like I said earlier, isn't fiber beneficial for reducing LDL? No, it's not. Fiber doesn't benefit for reducing blood pressure. It doesn't benefit for reducing type 2 diabetes. It has only mixed benefits in inflammatory bowel disease. It's just, fiber is perhaps the most misunderstood substance available. But so when people say you need to eat plants, they usually have three things. They say you need it for fiber, you need it for vitamins and minerals, and you need it for polyphenols. And, in future talks, we can go into the lack of need for plants for polyphenols or vitamins and minerals. But I think that in this one, we've at least touched on the fiber piece pretty clearly. And the idea that we need fiber for short-chain fatty acids is completely false. The only other thing I will add is that Rhonda Patrick, Stephen Gundry love to say, if you don't eat fiber, then the cells in the bacteria in your gut will digest the mucus layer of your gut, and you'll get inflammation. Because if you don't feed those bacteria, you'll get inflammation. This is complete bullshit as well. They're basing it on one study from 2016 in the journal Cell. And the study is a dietary fiber-derived gut microbiota degrades the colonic mucus barrier and enhances pathogen susceptibility. The title sounds pretty concerning, but when you look at the study, what they actually did in the study was they took mice that were gnotobiotic. So they had these mice and they raised the mice without any colon bacteria. So the mice are sterile. And then they put into the mice 14 organisms, which they called a human-like microbiome. So they created a synthetic microbiome in a mouse. And that synthetic microbiome was a carbohydrate-liking microbiome. So what happens is that we get a shift in the microbiome. And this is a whole other topic, whether, how a carnivorous diet, how a no carbohydrate diet affects the microbiome. Incidentally, what we tend to see is actually an increase in diversity, contrary to what everyone would think. But a carnivorous diet does not lead to death of the microbiome. Bacteria can live on protein and fat, just like they can live on carbohydrates, but we select for certain different types of bacteria. Sure. So when they take mice without any bacteria in the gut, and they introduce a human-like microbiome, it's sort of the whole experimental design is flawed. I mean, a mouse is not a human. That's not a real human microbiome. It's only 14 organisms. And the organisms they're putting in there are organisms that like carbohydrate. So if you put a carbohydrate-liking microbiome into a mouse and you deprive it of carbohydrates, yeah, it's going to digest the mucus layer a little bit. But here's the kicker. What did they see? They saw the mucus layer go down, but histologically, there were no pathologic changes suggesting inflammation. If you read the paper, there is no pathologic change. So they were like, well, it looks like the mucus layer went down, but when we did the histology, there were no pathologic changes. And we don't know what this means, but we worry. And it's like, wait a minute. Like, it's just this contrived at every level. So the next time you hear someone say, oh, well, there's this really important study that showed that if you don't eat carbohydrates, you will the bacteria in your gut will digest the mucus. That's bullshit again. People, it's just like you have suggested that a lot of people in the space are unfortunately only parroting information and they're not reading the studies in detail and they don't understand it. It's hard for me to blame them because it's really hard to read every study and to know in detail. And I can't do that, and you can't do that. Nobody can know everything in detail. But as part of this process, and being a physician involved in thinking about the carnivore diet for myself, I've had to do so much research into all these things people talk about. And they say, "What about Gundry says this?" and Rhonda Patrick says this, and I say, "That's bullshit. Like, look at the study. That's not actually showing anything." And we don't see this clinically in humans on carnivorous diets. We don't see insulin resistance. We don't see inflammation. Those of us on carnivore diets to check inflammatory markers like HSCRP, it's very, very, very low. It's like 0.03. It's super, super low. It's not even a question. There's no inflammation. There's no insulin resistance, which is what you would tend to see if there really were inflammatory changes in the gut. If the gut were really digesting the mucus layer after, 6 months of strict carnivore like I've done, or how long have you been carnivore?
Probably about 6 month level now. Yeah.
6 months. I mean, we would not have, believe me, the mucus layer in my gut and your gut would be gone. And we would, I mean, according to this theory, we would have inflammatory bowel disease. We would have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. And that just doesn't happen. There's no inflammation. I'm not shitting blood.
Unfortunately, I died 3 months ago because of scurvy. So,
well, now you're reincarnated in some sort of bodhisattva or something, which makes you a force to be reckoned with on YouTube.
Oh, so. You bet.
Garth Davis doesn't know that he's like arguing against someone that's like reincarnated. It's not even a fair fight.
Yeah, no, of course not.
So this has been Garth. Bart, this has been awesome. I appreciate you talking, and we'll do this again. We can post this on each of our channels. I hope people will comment below and let us know if you have questions. I try to get to my comments. They're often overwhelming and I can't get to all of them. Where are you on social media? Where can people find you?
Okay, I have a YouTube channel. Just do a Google search for Nutrition Science Watchdog, and the first 15 pages that come up will be me.
Cool.
You can't miss me. That's easy. You'll find me on the Book of Faces, if you like, under my own name. There's a picture of me that's very clearly me with a green screen background behind me. You can't miss it, if you like.
On Facebook, okay.
Yeah, but again, you'll probably need to tell me, that we've got several shared connections for that one. Where else can you find me? You can find me on my Patreon channel, which is also very easy. It's just http Patreon with an E, patreon.com/Bart_K. Very, very easy.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
And I know you're not on Instagram a lot, but maybe we can convince you to spend more time on Instagram.
Maybe. I'm actually, I'm nearly 50 years of age, and I come from another I guess, paradigm in terms of the technology and stuff. It's all a bit overwhelming from time
I
to
know,
time.
I feel the same way. If people want to find me, I mean, they can find me at, I mean, I don't know, I have a YouTube channel too. It's Paul Saladino MD. They can email me directly at paulsaladinomd@gmail.com. I'm a functional medicine doctor here in the States. I work with people privately. My website is paulsaladinomd.com. I'm on Instagram at Paul Saladino MD, and I'm on Twitter at MD Saladino. I have a Facebook page, Paul Saladino MD, and I have a Patreon page as well, which should be under Paul Saladino MD. So people can find us in all of those outlets. And if people appreciate this, we will actually look at the comments below and see what people want us to talk about. But I just thought it would be really interesting. I appreciate you coming on so much. Just having two people in the science world talk about the carnivore diet and what we're seeing and different perspectives and stuff. So this is great, man. Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate you. Thanks very much, Paul. And let's absolutely do this again. Yes, please.
Yeah, we'll do it again. All right.
Cool.
Thanks for watching the video, you guys. As you'll notice below the video, I have a Patreon account set up. So if you are interested in supporting my work, check that out. I have bonuses there for people who contribute. These include a private Q&A with me in the future, pre-released content, specialty content, etc., and the ability to vote on which videos I'm making in the future. So check out my Patreon if you'd like to support my work, and I hope you guys are doing great, and I will see you soon.